Now let's go really to the beginning of our tour, and we'll really start around the walls. We'll start with Jaffa Gate and David's Citadel and Herod's Palace. This area of the city is the highest point in the city. It's called the Citadel, which means the highest point of the city, and has always provided a strategic point of defense and an overview of the city. Now here's a close-up picture of the area called David's Citadel and the Jaffa Gate. This, in the 1st century, was Herod's western fortress. Some of the most ambitious building projects in Jerusalem long history were initiated by Herod the Great during his long reign between 37 BC and 4 BC. Among Herod's major buildings was a defense system erected in the northwest corner of the city, which is what we're looking at here, added to earlier Hasmonean fortifications to guard a palace which he built nearby. Josephus described the defense system consisting of 3 towers named Phaziel for Herod's brother, Hippicus for his close friend, and Miriam for his wife. One of those towers has been preserved and incorporated in later forts on the same site down to the present day. We're going to take a really close look at that in a minute, the preserved tower, the only one that's still there. Herod's palace was located in the upper city. The wise men could have visited Herod in this place. This may also be the place that Pilate sent the Savior in order to be interrogated by Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, during the last week of his life. Now the blue circle on the left is the aerial view of David's Citadel, and it's enlarged in the center screen. The red arrow shows the gate itself, and the mauve outline shows the area in both pictures from both elevations. Now we're going to do a side-by-side here. The left is just from a higher aerial view, and now we're coming down to the street level on the right of Jaffa Gate as you enter the city from the west. The blue oval, that's the same tower in both pictures. Just to make sure we know it's Jaffa Gate. Now, as the picture rises to the left, it unveils the same view as it's portrayed in the Holy Land Hotel model of Jaffa Gate. At the bottom left, it shows the same area, the same gate, just showing more of a tower called Phaziel's Tower. Now we're going to take a closer look at that picture on the left, showing the 3 towers of Herod's palace. There's the gate in the model. That was a tower called Phaziel's Tower. This tower, now at the northeast inner corner of David's Citadel, is one of 3 towers built by Herod for his defense system of the western side of the city. It is probably the one named Phaziel, the largest named after his brother. It stood 145 feet high. Early Christian pilgrims renamed it David's Tower, they romantically imaging Israel's first king to have retired to this tower to write his psalms. That one's called the Miriam's Tower, is the most beautiful, named after his beloved Hasmonean wife, whom he had murdered. Josephus said, "The king, considering it appropriate that the tower named after a woman should surpass its decoration those called after men." Yeah, but it only stood 74 feet high. This is called the Hippicus Tower, named after a friend, and was 130 feet high. Now, if I remember correctly, the friends and relatives for whom he named all of these towers he had executed as Herod the Great became Herod the Paranoid. Now in the distance there in the model you can see the Temple Mount, Solomon's porticos. From Phaziel's tower, Herod had a citadel view, citadel meaning the highest place in the city, to be able to see everything basically in Jerusalem from this place. And Herod's palace was off to the right. We'll take a look at that a little more. Now we're back to the modern day view. Now you'll see Phaziel's tower in modern view expand. We're going to take a closer look at that. Now this is a side-by-side. On the left we have the Holy Land Hotel model, and on the right we have the actual part of the tower. You can see the red outline in both pictures of what is left of the original tower. And only the bottom third is still remaining, at least a part of it. Now if you watch the picture in the center, this is what you could go see today, the current tower. And the small inset picture on the left, it's going to demonstrate what parts are still to be seen and can be seen today. And the purple, that's considered 1st century Herodian. Now you can see the stones, and they are visibly 1st century Herodian, but that's essentially all that can be seen of the original tower in the left inset picture. The green outline is actually 11th century Crusader. Now they wanted to make the tower stronger and had to build it out some, and so there are Herodian stones behind the stones you can see there, but these were 11th century Crusader build-out stones. And the yellow at the top in both are 12th century AD medieval repairs. That the part of the wall in the 12th century was raised up to make it a higher tower. It was not existing prior to that. As you can see at the green at the top, in the 1st century, when Titus destroyed most of Jerusalem in 70 AD, he spared Herod's fortress, but nothing remained of the Herod's 3 towers, and the citadel named David's Tower stands in the spot of Phaziel's tower. So the palace was spared, but these towers were all torn down by Titus in 70 AD. And all that remained really after that was the pink. That was it. Just totally razed. That's the destruction that the Romans did. Now we're back to our timeline, and this is just to show what the history of David's Citadel is. Now, we'll bring up the tower and its color schedules just to get an idea of the time that's involved in this one tower. Looking at the pink section, that's the 1st century Herodian. Now Jesus would have seen that part of the tower as a part of the whole Phaziel's tower. But then the lower parts that were built out were 1,000 years later at the 11th century, and then the top part in another 100 years in the medieval repairs in the 12th century were built on top of that. Now this is a fellow crusader who traveled with me as a fellow student, Glenn Potter, archaeologist extraordinaire. We frequently actually walked along the walls of the old city together. It was kind of exciting to look down in the city with all that was going on, because with the exception of the Temple Mount area and a few other hard to negotiate sections, it's possible to circumnavigate the old city just along these walls. You have to come down a couple times in the steps and then go back up. But you're not allowed to go onto the walls of the Temple Mount. But in the first century, that was the whole idea. You could circumnavigate the old city via the walls. Let's take a look back. We're going to narrow in on Jaffa Gate area, but more of our goal is Herod's Palace. Now this is the Armenian quarter from the air. The blue circle is the gate that we've been looking at Jaffa Gate there on the west side of the city. The green circle shows the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And we'll look at a detailed look at that, but that's where Christ was, a church over where Christ was buried and where he was crucified. Now that pink arrow and the circle is Suleiman Road. It's one of my jogging roads. It's the one that goes down to Jericho Road. And if you continue down that road just half a mile, you'll come to what's called Gordon's Garden Tomb. And the red circle just to the center right is a Lutheran church tower. Now, I use that church tower. I climb up to take some of my aerial views of the city itself. They allow you to go up there, and it's actually a good perspective, right in the middle of, nearly in the middle of the old city, to be able to look at it all. Some of my aerial pictures are from that perspective. There's the Armenian quarter. Now we come back to our home base aerial, and these are the same locations that I was showing in the Armenian quarter, except from this high and this far back. The pink oval in the distance is the approximate location of where Gordon's Golgotha is, and Gordon's tomb, the garden tomb. Now this is where we're narrowing on this segment. This is the palace outline for Herod's Palace. This would have been the location in Jerusalem where Herod had his palace. That red arrow is going to be where we're going to take a perspective from the ground view in just a minute. And the green square appears just to show that there's the Greek school again, and that's the view we're going to take when we come down to the ground level. This is along the model at Holy Land Hotel, which grows out and shows this is what it would have looked like from that red arrow perspective in the first century. We would be looking down and at Herod's Palace from here, and there's Fazil's tower, and there's Miriam's tower being pointed out. Now this is the current modern view, right along Har-Zion Road, and the tower in the distance is the Lutheran tower, and it's about the same place that where Fazil's tower would be. It'd be a little closer than that, actually. This picture is from the balcony of the Institute of Holy Land Studies. The Greek school is on the immediate right there. We've seen that from the air, built in the 19th century. And David'sCitadel and Tower and Jaffa Gate are where the two walls intersect straight ahead. There's a side-by-side picture of the Holy Land Hotel model showing the same view of the western walls. That shows where Jaffa Gate is in both centuries. Now we've side by side of the same wall. Now the three areas are showing again Fazil's tower and Miriam's tower, but that third arrow on the right shows what you would see if you could get up this high. You would see the Temple Mount from here. Now on the bottom left picture, even if you climbed on top of the Greek school, you're unable to see the Temple Mount area from here. You'd have to get much higher. Now the blue arrows are just showing the same perspective in both pictures. The white dotted arrows coming up in the upper picture, that's to show the Herod's view from Phaziel's tower. The Temple Mount was a flashpoint during the Roman occupation of Israel in the 1st century. And Herod was paranoid, and he had good reason to be, really. But he, in order to defend the city, he also needed to protect himself from uprisings that occurred on the Temple Mount. So he needed a straight line of view over to what's called the Antonia Fortress at the end of those white dotted lines. And then from the Antonia Fortress, they could see down onto the Temple Mount anytime anything happened that might be threatening. Now there's the view too from Phaziel's tower, more close up, so you could see, you could get up there as a guard and look down to the Temple Mount. Kind of a wider view, trying to get the view from Phaziel's tower and the perspective. Now we're back to this view, and see the orange square in the middle? That is the courtyard in the model of Herod's Palace. Herod's Palace was the primary of 7 fortresses that paranoid Herod built. We're going to look at a few more of those a little later when we take a trip down into the Negev. Next slide, we're going to come right down into Herod's Palace and take a closer look at it. That was the orange square. Now it's a rectangle. And this is just a rendition of what Herod might have built for himself. Now, again, that's where Herod's courtyard and palace would be in the modern view from the aerial view. Now, I want to take a look at the perspective from Herod's Palace and Phaziel's tower. From there you could see the Temple Mount and the Western Wall, what we call the Western Wall today. So we'll look at the Western Wall from Herod's Palace. The arrow and the rectangle are pointing out where the Western Wall is in the city, over by the Temple Mount. And then this side by side, you can see the same perspective. In the inset picture, you'll see the same view that you would have today in the current city, looking from Jaffa Gate over to the Temple Mount. Now get up on the Lutheran church tower, and this is the view today that parallels the view that that Herod would have had from his Phaziel's tower. It might be a little lower than what his view was, but this is the closest you can get. That white line goes off to the direction of the Antonia Fortress. That one goes directly to where the temple would have been. And that view points out the Mount of Olives and the Garden of Gethsemane over there. Now the red outline, it shows where the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, is today. Now, a pretty good view from here of Transjordan and the Dead Sea. On a good day, you could see Jordan from here. And there's the closer up view of the Temple Mount. You can see the Garden of Gethsemane on the left and the Russian church with its onion domes. And 2 of the spires at the top of the Mount of Olives in the distance. This is an aerial view of the Temple Mount now. and the white dotted line appearing, and the red square is showing where the Antonia fortress would have been. Ecce Homo is there today. The one dotted line in center left is pointing to the Mosque of Omar, which in the green line outlines the Temple Mount itself, the whole Temple Mount. The center dotted line gives a clear perspective in the view that overshoots the Temple Mount over to the Mount of Olives. And the red circle shows the Church of All Nations in that red oval. Now we get to the western wall, and the dotted line shows us that. When Rome destroyed the Second Temple in 78 AD, only one outer wall remained standing. The Romans probably would not have destroyed that wall as well, but it must have seemed too insignificant to them. It was not even part of the temple itself. So Jesus' prophecy did come true. It was just an outer wall surrounding the Temple Mount. For the Jews, however, this remnant of what was the most sacred building in the Jewish world quickly became the holiest spot in Jewish life. This area today is known as the Wailing Wall. It gives an idea of how large this wall actually was. From here you can also see Wilson's Arch, but we'll take a closer look at that, the area of Wilson's Arch. Now this side-by-side gives a really good perspective of the proximity of the western wall with the Temple Mount from an aerial view. Now the yellow oval in both pictures places Herod's Temple on the Temple Mount in an area that I call the Site B for the Temple Mount. Now, there are scholars who believe the temple actually was placed there in the 1st century, and we'll look more at that in detail. I call that Site C. So it moves over. Now this is really a good shot on the left of an aerial showing that proximity of the western wall down below, which the arrow points in both centuries, and then another arrow points out the Temple Mount side by side. This is a higher area view perspective, but it shows much more and a better perspective of all that in one picture. The western wall in both centuries, the Temple Mount in both centuries. Now this yellow line points out what's called the southwestern corner of the Temple Mount. And at that southwestern corner, and actually the southern wall of the Temple Mount, was a structure called Solomon's porticos. We'll look at that more in detail later too. This picture is one of the most beautiful I have of the Western Wall. It's all that remains of Jerusalem Temple where Jesus taught and prayed. This wall formed part of the plaza upon which stood the remodeled temple of Herod the Great. Herod's vast remodeling project began in 19 BC and continued long after his death. It was completed only 7 years before the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 AD. It acquired the name Western Wall because during the long exile of the Jewish people from the city, they could return only once a year to mourn the destruction of the temple. When Israeli tanks rumbled into Jerusalem's Old City in June of 1967, it was the first time, except for a brief period in 135 AD, that Jews controlled the site since 70 AD. By the medieval age, the area west of the Temple Mount had become choked with domestic structures and other buildings. Jews then and through the following centuries who attempted to pray at the Western Wall were at the least crowded into a narrow alley-like space. Frequently they were even excluded from the city altogether or forced to pay a fee for the privilege of the pilgrimage. As recently as the 1920s, during the British Mandate administration, Jewish attempts to erect a partition next to the wall to separate the men from the women at prayer sparked riots between Muslims and Jews, which cost lives. In 1967, before the dust had settled from the Six-Day War, a broad plaza area was cleared by bulldozers to allow easier access to the Jewish place of prayer. Throughout the centuries, Jews from throughout the world made the difficult pilgrimage to Palestine and immediately headed for the Kotel Amaravi, the Western Wall, to thank God. The prayers offered at the Kotel were so heartfelt that Gentiles began calling the site the Wailing Wall. This undignified name never won a wide following among traditional Jews. The term Western Wall is not used in Hebrew. The Western Wall was subject to far worse than semantic indignities. During the more than 1,000 years Jerusalem was under Muslim rule, the Arabs often used the wall as a garbage dump so as to humiliate Jews who visited it. Now what's on the screen now is our recurring timeline. Hope we're a little familiar with this. And it's just to point out this wall, when was it built? It was built by Herod in about 20 BC. So definitely Jesus would have seen this part of the Temple Mount had he been walking down the Tyropoeon Valley in the 1st century.